Where did Ben Franklin used to get hammered?
The streets all over the place.
Yeah, it's like, we just drove by 4 spots.
Yeah, he slept one off.
2 brothels and
He
one.
slept one off right by that fire hydrant.
Yeah.
So I haven't been to Independence Hall since I think it was 2010, because we actually held a big Tea Party meeting here. And at the time, like I know a lot more about the history leading up to the Declaration of Independence today than I did then. It was sort of the activists that forced me to go back and like study my history.
Yeah.
And not just the Boston Tea Party, all of the stuff that was going on that led these guys to bet the farm. You know, everyone says it was George Washington, but I think Ben Franklin was kind of the glue. Maybe that's controversial.
So I think you're absolutely right with respect that both of them played this kind of elder statesman role. I think Ben Franklin did it more from the political side, and Washington more from being especially when we're talking about the Constitution, presiding over that, because I think it's one of the issues that we have in politics right now is that there's so few figures that can kind of cross over the typical divides we have that are just universally respected. I was raised in a educational environment where the founders were talked about like demigods, and demigods don't really have to work for it, right? They just snap their fingers and things happen. And then you read about who these guys were and the circumstances and the context and the environment and the times they were living in. And I have so much more respect for them now, just seeing them as human beings operate in this environment, than I ever did when they were, Thor.
Yeah, we used to lionize these guys as if they were sort of infallible, which of course they weren't. And now I feel like we do the opposite. Like
now we demonize them.
We tear them down and demonize them for every human failure that they had, particularly in a historical context. But my takeaway has always been pretty remarkable. I call it an accident of history, and I realize that there's an intellectual path that brought these guys to where they were, but the idea that people could govern themselves was such a radical concept. I don't think modern American professors or students have any sort of appreciation about how important it was for Thomas Jefferson to say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those were not really accepted rules for people before that. So this is it. And I feel bad that I don't actually get to spend more time here, because when I was a kid, my parents were totally into this, and we would go through all these things. Didn't appreciate it then, but it's a special place.
Kind of the same situation. I can remember coming to places as a kid, and I was reasonably appreciative, but then you start to understand how difficult this all was, and I think it adds an entirely new perspective.
What's your take on the debate about whether or not Jefferson and Washington and other founding slaveholders have any credibility, and does the document still have credibility even though these guys were flawed and the process didn't produce the perfect outcome? It's
a valid point, it's a valid concern, but what would you have preferred? Have you preferred they had been intellectually consistent with their position and said all people of a certain skin color are equal? I think deep down Washington and Jefferson understood that there was an inherent contradiction with what they were trying to do and the current economic circumstances of the colonies.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually a credit to them that they put something in there that they knew. I think they had to know this was going to sow the seeds eventually for the ending of slavery, for abolition, because how do you live with that kind of contradiction? How do you have beautiful words with such powerful impact and meaning and then go back to your plantation with a bunch of slaves.
Yeah.
And so rather than try to water down the Declaration of Independence in order to address the economic situation, I think they were more comfortable with the contradiction because they knew eventually it would yield more positive results for human freedom.
It's a debate we have every day, though, between sort of libertarian purity and the process of democracy and trying to move things in the right direction. Because the net result, you can look around us, look at the prosperity in this city. America got it right, but I think a lot of people, the reason they don't respect what these guys did is they don't even know.
Yeah.
Like, you don't get it in school. They need to come here. And sort of appreciate what these guys were trying to accomplish in the historical context of kings and despots and constant war and conflict.
A rigid class system that was all based off of dynastic struggles. I mean, it's a world that we're so now separated from because of what they did that they don't get proper credit for it. This has become the norm, and this was anything but. In that time period. And even now, if you look at the full length of human history, or even what's going on in the rest of the world, this is still incredibly unique and special.
You know, we all now worship at the altar of democracy, and I'm a radical Democrat. Like I'm a radical Democrat in the sense that Jefferson was. Like, he believed that people could be responsible, self-governed, responsible for their lives. You know, Adams, of course, thought that Jefferson was a little crazy on that stuff. But even democracy today, the one that functions best for all of our problems is ours.
Well, and I do think it's because one of the cultural institutions that we set up was that federalist system. It was the separation of powers. George Will, I think, said it once best, where he said that political gridlock is not an American problem, it's an American achievement. Simply because whenever you have a system that is overly responsive to whatever popular will happens to be in the moment, you end up running roughshod over minority rights, you end up running roughshod over certain cultural institutions that play a vital role in the stability of society. And so making sure that we had something that was responsive, but also permitted some time to consider, and then set up something where we weren't trying to impose something. At that time, it would have been on several or tens of millions of Americans. Now we're talking about doing it on 300 million Americans. Recognizing that we shouldn't be making all those decisions from one room in a centralized government. This is, that dispersion of power is a positive thing. And you do look at other systems where there is no concept of federalism. There's a national government, not a federal government. And
another great American tradition, of course, is beer.
Oh, yes.
And I've read that a lot of these deals and ideals were hatched up in the taverns, so I think we need to go find one.
I think it's our patriotic duty, really.
Yeah, it's a moral responsibility.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.